Hello and welcome to the final session in our series of 6 sessions on the Hitchhiker's Guide to Artificial Intelligence. Today, we'll be addressing AI and the impact of AI on the city of the future. And these are the 6 sessions that we've had over the last 6 days. What is AI? AI and the myth of creativity, AI, media, art, and neuroscience, AI in architectural design, and AI in the architectural office of the future. This session builds upon, in fact, the last session on the architectural office of the future, because we're looking at some of the tools and some of the ways of thinking that are going to inform how we address our cities of the future. I'm delighted today by being joined by a series of very eminent researchers and scholars who will be making some presentations. Let me start, first of all, with Violet Whitney. Violet is the founding product manager of Delve by Sidewalk Labs, which is an AI-powered product for neighborhood and real estate development planning. She's also an adjunct assistant professor at Columbia University, where she teaches courses in urban data analytics and tangible computing. And she's also an advisor for the new master's program, Computational Design Practices. Violet also co-leads Architechies, a meetup network for people who are passionate about urban technology. Namju Lee is an architectural designer, researcher, and lecturer. He has been the principal of NJ Studio since 2004, specializing in architecture, computational design, and visualization. He graduated from Seoul National University of Science and Technology, and then USC Berkeley, and then Harvard GSD, where he completed an MDes. He is as a researcher, he has worked both at Urban Aid Lab at the University of Technology in Sydney, at Sensible City Lab and Media Lab at MIT, and at the College of Environmental Design, UC Berkeley. Sumin Ham is the founder of Sumin Ham Design Limited. She is a design researcher, educator, architectural designer. She is currently a member of the design faculty and robotic researcher at SCIARC, Southern California Institute of Architecture. And prior to that, she worked as a senior designer for Zaha Hadid Architects and taught on the B-Pro program at UCL Bartlett. She's also a candidate on the D-Des at the Florida International University. And finally, Biana Bogosian, who's also one of my colleagues at FIU, her background is she trained as an architect at Woodbury before going to Columbia University and then teaching at Columbia University. She's also taught at Cornell University, USC, and Tongji University. She's just completing her PhD in Media Arts and Practice at the USC School of Cinematic Arts program. And fairly recently, she became a assistant professor at FIU, where she's been very successful in winning a series of awards, in particular NSF National Science Foundation awards. So it's a wonderful lineup we have today. I wanted to say a few words of introduction. Then I'll be inviting, first of all, Violet, followed by NJ, followed by Biana, and then say a few more words before inviting Sumin Ham. But I want to sort of ask a basic question about what is the city of the future? What would it be like? Is it going to be like this kind of image of a kind of jet set city straight out of the Jetsons with flying cars and all sorts of kind of totally transformed, a futuristic city that is almost unimaginable today? Or is the city of the future going to look pretty much like it does now? This is a view of LA, where I am right now, with a few new buildings, but on the whole, most buildings being retrofitted with new technologies, and AI being brought in all over the place to make the city run in a particular kind of way. A few years back, in 2009, I was the editor of a special edition of Architectural Design on Digital Cities. And in those days, we had imagined the future of the city would look something like this image on the front cover by a proposal for Istanbul by Zaha Hadid Architects, where they were imagining this large-scale parametric intervention. And this, of course, was very famously where Patrick first broached the idea of parametricism as a new global style for architecture and urbanism that would very soon, in his vision, become all-pervasive across the world. And of course, we've seen a number of very kind of provocative and inspirational designs for cities of the future coming out of that particular office. This was an early one for Singapore that was made so many years ago. But since then, apart from Istanbul itself, there have been other ones. Soho in China, an image of a view of a large scale intervention. One in London that was in the east of London. But despite all those proposals, we haven't as yet seen anything quite of that scale. Of course, we've seen a number of highly significant projects coming out of the office of Zaha Hadid Architects, including some really large-scale buildings. This is an office block for Soho in Beijing. This is the largest airport in the world, also in Beijing. And collectively, one could imagine an entire city of these, of such projects, enormous, huge projects that are reshaping our cities in many ways. But we haven't as yet seen any one particular urban development where these have all come together. Inspirational as they are, we haven't seen a kind of collection of these in one particular city. In hindsight, then, maybe the most far-sighted contribution to that issue of architectural design on the digital city was perhaps by Ben Bratton, the final essay, in fact, in the article, where he argued that actually the city of the future would be changed, transformed. In fact, it already was being transformed, not by new architectural forms, but by new informational systems. And the iPhone, for example, he was arguing, was what allowed us to understand and navigate the city in new and innovative ways. And he spoke at the time about how one could use the iPhone, how the car had become the office, and so on. And that, of course, was before Uber had come online. It was 1 year before Uber arrived. And this, to my mind, has really I think that Ben Bratton was perhaps was really had nailed the issue precisely. We haven't seen these futuristic designs, but we have seen the city completely transformed by these informational cities. The way that we navigate the city, the way we can order Uber cars, and so on and so on. Everything has been transformed by these informational systems. And in many ways, then, it is not form, but information that is transforming our cities today. And the notion, of course, the informational city is not new. Manuel Castells referred to it many years ago as this kind of the way in which the network city would be the new city. And more recently, too, in 2016, Ben Bratton wrote the book called The Stack, where he took that notion of this kind of network city and reconceptualized it and took it from 2 dimensions into 3 dimensions. And he describes how the stack becomes this multiple layered vision of the city, where each layer is itself interconnected. And we get this, what he calls this accidental megastructure of the city, in which somehow the stack has become all pervasive. And here are the 6 different layers that are interconnected, not only between, let's say, cities and other cities, but also between the layers of the cities themselves. So it strikes me that what we're now in a situation whereby we're not just getting smart cities, we're not just getting cities where there are smart devices and so on, but we're getting cities which have been kind of interconnected, that are using AI as a form of background ambient intelligence. Of course, we ourselves already colonize the city through AI. As Benjamin Bratton has also pointed out, the city wears us just as much as we wear our smart devices. It has all become a kind of interconnected sort of world, but increasingly the possibility of ambient intelligence is opening up the possibility of understanding how the city can go beyond the simple vision of the smart city to become something extraordinary. So we have, alongside the informational city, also the informational architect, the architects who are imagining the possibilities of how these new informational cities will be transforming our future. So I'm going to skip out at this point and invite Violet Whitney to show us some of the extraordinary work that they've been doing using Delve. And what I find so interesting about this particular new software is the way that it takes things into a kind of ethical dimension, whereby environmental concerns become central to the way that we imagine our cities. So, Violet, I would like you to invite you to share your screen and give us an introduction to Delve. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really excited just to share what we've been up to, and really appreciate the framing that you just gave. All right, so you all see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So always love to say that generative design is going to be the future of real estate development. And in many ways, that future is already here. We on Delve definitely experience that. But before I jump into that, hi, I'm Violet. Want to say I am a huge nerd on all things generative design and connected cities. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Don't be a stranger. Find me on LinkedIn. Always happy to talk about this stuff. Sidewalk Labs, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a subsidiary of Alphabet. So we belong to this family of bets, these moonshot projects that are looking at investing in long-term solutions to some big problems. So these bets are things like DeepMind that created AlphaGo, the AI that beat the World Go champion, but also Waymo doing self-driving cars. So you can see there's a kind of wide variety there. Sidewalk Labs specifically is an urban innovation company. So by urban innovation company, that's development services for new sites that are looking to integrate urban tech, but it's also products. So products like our sensor called Pebble that helps with parking and curb management, but also products like mass timber buildings. Also products like Delve, this AI master planning product, which I'll talk about. But all of these under the umbrella of having the intent to really make cities more sustainable and more affordable. So the big question, why is generative design the future of real estate development? If anyone knows about planning, and I'm sure many here do, they know it's increasingly complex. So when an architect is trying to pack more square footage on a site, they don't really know what the cost implications are when they're working in that 3D model. A cost modeler is working in spreadsheets, but they don't really know if that fits spatially on the site. So those questions usually are answered by going back and forth via email, which means lots of time. And usually that means you're only looking at 3 or so options at a time, which means most of the options that are possible aren't ever even explored. So with Delve, the aim is really using generative design to automatically create large batches of designs and look at the problem statistically, really about leaving no stone unturned, with that aim of uncovering the hidden potential that's latent in a site. So when we're automatically churning out those designs, that means that you're able to find millions of dollars of profit on cost. That means you're able to find quality of life that's a lot better. So that value that we think is latent in a site usually just doesn't even get explored. And just want to say, you know, it's not just this kind of complicated AI generative design hoopla that's happening in the background. The critical element to this is also making planning approachable. So you shouldn't have to be a computational design, GIS, cost modeling expert to use Delve. We've really worked on making it easy enough that any architect, any developer can interact with our interface and put in their program requirements, and be able to see results. And so something that I'm personally really motivated by is having this idea of being able to scale expertise beyond just experts. So this idea that we can really bring planning tools to the majority of development where formal planning hasn't even been possible because of cost constraints or maybe lack of expertise in a specific domain. So in the future, in the development world future, we should really be thinking at a higher level. You shouldn't have to individually lay out parking. You shouldn't have to individually pack units to see if they fit on the site. We should really be looking at these big picture goals and trade-offs while using products like Delve that generate and score designs based on your constraints for you. And just want to leave you with a final video, if that's all right.
Last fall,
Are you
we
able to hear
introduced
that?
you to Delve by Sidewalk Labs.
Yes.
In this video, we'll explore how Delve will save you time and money, just like it has already for development teams around the world, from Tokyo to London, Vancouver to Singapore, even suburban India. Delve has helped each of our customers meet or exceed their desired quality of life metrics, while maximizing their financial returns. How does Delve do it? We thought you'd never ask. The first step in using Delve is selecting and ranking your priority outcomes, like greenhouse gas emissions or cost. Next, we work with you to define your most important constraints, like your financials and program requirements. That's when Delve delivers your first round of generated designs, a few hundred, say. That's right, in a few minutes, Delve delivers hundreds of viable designs. Every single one of Delve's generated design options integrates a financial model customized to you. That means you can see how different designs, building massings, program mixes, or unit sizes will impact returns, enabling you to meaningfully weigh the financial impact of each design from the start. This feature has saved our customers significant amounts of time and carry costs, and in some cases, unlocked tens of millions of dollars in project value. Each design also comes with a score, so you can easily surface the option that best satisfies your needs. And you should know you don't need computational design experts to use Delve. One of our designers will work with you and your team. And once you're onboarded, we'll help you to keep refining your constraints and goals for better and better designs. Delve can even generate new options based just on your favorites. Let's delve deeper into a design generated by Delve. Here, the developer was looking for a diverse yet profitable program mix. And you can see what Delve has recommended in terms of the number of residential, commercial, retail, and community spaces. Delve can also visualize other details of the site, such as the apartment type breakdown. Delve can perform sophisticated parking analyses, helping you determine how much overground, underground, or surface level parking you need. It can show the site's projected greenhouse gas emissions, too. Whether your project is 1 block or 300 acres, whether you're at the feasibility stage, the entitlement stage, or deep into design, Delve provides you critical insight early in the planning process, saving you time and money, and empowering you to create more livable places, neighborhoods, and cities. Request access now at sidewalklabs.com/Delve. Delve. Discover better designs today.
You're muted, Violet.
Oh, I said thank you very much.
Okay. One thing, it was interesting. I didn't realize, of course, that DeepMind is also an Alphabet company. But what we were saying yesterday, we had a discussion about X-School, who developed some software in China, and actually, it's a DeepMind match against Lisa Doll that really triggered things off in China. It was, for us in the West, it's not chess is the game, not Go, but that was the kind of what they call the Sputnik moment that Kai-Fu Lee's described it, when suddenly they think this is the moment. And it was incredible how in China they've completely transformed their frame of reference. I mean, AI is so big in China, you can't believe it. But what I also think is interesting about that the DeepMind thing is the comment I was making yesterday was to say that you have that actually, if we can understand the urban design in terms of two facets. One is urban planning, which is really the strategic approach to it. You call it statistic, but it's basically a strategic approach, versus the kind of urban design, which is more the kind of aesthetics of what it looks like and so on. And that, I think, that is the first part, is really where AI can be so useful, because the complexities of the city are such that really we can't even imagine it in our own mind, and that's where it becomes important. So, to my mind, that and it's interesting also that some of the results that come out that are generated computationally are not ones we could imagine. And this is kind of also interesting that other SpaceMaker AI, for example, found out that there were things coming out that were totally counterintuitive. Actually, when you look at them more carefully, they really made sense. But it's almost like the way in which they're producing things was like that famous move in that game, Move 37 in Game 2, where suddenly there was this move and no one could figure it out. And that's, to my mind, is really where AI has such a contribution to make in imagining or strategically looking at things and engaging with statistics to go and imagine possibilities beyond that which we could imagine ourselves. So we'll come back to some questions later on. It was really fantastic to get this. And what I like about Delve so much is the kind of the ethical and the environmental thing that you can input as well. So it can go beyond that to customize it in an important way. So thank you so much. I'm going to call upon Namju now to make some presentations. Namju is a kind of informational architect in many ways, the quintessential one who has been responsible for many things. And I want to thank also Namju for running a workshop this year, along with last year, and making such a contribution to digital futures. Welcome, Ninjay.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me here. And my name is Namju Lee. I'm specializing in computation design and visualization and architectural design. And now I'm currently working at Esri as a software engineer to develop some 2D, 3D mapping products. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we discretize the spatial information, which is data from urban context, and how we utilize this data as a design methodology for the urban design practice. So before we starting, I want to talk about what is the sort of basic question, what is our material for our design, basically. So as you can see here, stone, glass, plastic, iron, which is like a most essential material for human history, right? So I think that based on this material, the tool is basically developed based on this, the precision of the material or the characteristic of the material. So this is the picture, the people who live in 19th century to imagine what future looks like what 21st century the city looks like. So as you can see here, at the time, the railroad industries become expanding. So there are many people thought about like, the railroad industry gonna change our urban context. Yeah, so, but, we are living 21st century, so this kind of event is nothing happened. I guess the most important thing is that what I'm trying to say is that data is the most essential and important sort of the material for design. So here is a multiple sort of keyword that we are familiar with, right? The smart city, AI, machine learning, or edge computing, or parallel computing. So when you read this kind of keywords, what comes in your mind? I think the keyword actually made me remind of sort of the data. I mean, the fourth industrial revolution is possibly can be represented in multiple ways, but I guess the most essence of the fourth industrial revolution is, I guess, is how to collect the data, which is IoT or GPS technology, and how to process the data, like AI or machine learning and blockchain and edge computing technology. And lastly, how we apply the insight from the data, as a form of like smart city or a form of some, methodology for design. So data, I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about the data for the design practice, particularly focusing on the urban design. So as you can see here, we have data at different scale, from the product level to the urban scale. So with this data, I think the most important thing is that how we gonna process the data. I think we're basically dealing with the spatial data, right? It's the data could have some position in the space, right? So in this context, I guess the graph and pixel box is most essential data structure to process the data for your design purpose, right? So possibly there could be two different types of data. One data is more about like discrete data. We can take advantage of the graph data to process this discrete discrete data. And also we have like a 2-dimensional continuous data and additional 3-dimensional continuous data using voxel-like data structure. And then with this kind of the data, and we have a data structure, then we need to make some policy to drive our design process, right? So I call this is a system for wrapping up this kind of this strategy like data and methodology. So there are many sort of terms like optimization that we're familiar with, right? And also we have an automation and agent-based design system, like generative design system. I think this is the also some of a strategy to wrapping up the methodology things. So this is one of my research that I did in the media lab and changing place lab. So what I did is at the time, so we tried to abstract the urban context as a lens of third place. So that actually, you know, people, I don't know, after COVID-19, the human behavior gonna become a little bit different, but what I'm trying to do is to make a system to capture urban context as a form of a third place. But the most important thing is that how are we gonna dealing with the data, right? So in this context, I put the physical data. As you can see here, there are some sort of the network and path and load and tree. And also we have like some slope that characterize your site. And also we have a building, some social or infrastructure things, and on top of it, we try to overlap a third place by searching, you know, Google Map or Bing search. You can find some a lot of data related to this other place, and then we can try to, you know, characterize the city. So, for example, like what is different, you know, in terms of this other place between Boston and New York, Manhattan, for example. I think that this is the other way around of to take a look at how city can be read, what kind of insight we can extract out of this urban context. The second example is sort of methodology to again read urban context to you know, to extract the insight. In that context, what I did is there are two types of data set. One is the, let's say, top-down data, like local government and some organization, they actually intentionally, you know, they collect the data. And then the other way around is we are, I mean, human beings kind of the visual language, visual animal, right? So I'm trying to make some sort of, I mean, looking for the sort of relationship between the numeric information collected by the local government and other organizations with the visual perception. So this is also the other sort of methodology to how we, you know, read the urban context as a sort of tool. Yeah. And this is a similar approach, but at that time I submit some sort of exhibition with my friends, who is a Professor Dong-Se Kim and NIIT. What we did is try to compare two different projects. One is a Highline, and the other one is a Solo. Solo is a sort of a brand new project which benchmark a lot for the Highline. So we try to get the not only some visual perception, but also we try to analyze some semantic analysis, like based on the sentence or keyword people upload. So what I'm trying to do at the time is, you know, the local government has their own purpose to design, to initiate the project, the Solo. So we have like a very old bridge. We're gonna try to return, I mean, basically return this bridge to the people, public. So after finish this project, people visit the site and then upload a lot of picture and text, and then we can pass the information and trying to understand how people react against this kind of a monolith-like project. So this is also the other way around. Take a look at sort of urban context. And previously we talk about, as you know, some sarcastic approach. But on the computational way, we have the other approach, like a deterministic approach, right? So in this project, I and my partner, we try to make a sort of network analysis tool that allows us to understand just not only the network analysis, but also we had some of the measure system like centrality analysis and accessibility analysis, and then we model the mathematical modeling into the computation way, so that we can actually not only try to calculate the physical distance. There's a lot of types of distance, right, to measure as a cost function, like emotional distance, or physical distance, or social distance. We try to take into consideration to compute what is the more desirable path, right? Yeah. So these are also the methodology to deal with the urban data. And we are a little bit narrowed down here. So we try to in this project try to do make a sort of optimization for creating a parking lot, which is the developer wanted to get sort of the strategy in Singapore. So Singapore has a very strict rules, so we're gonna follow it, and we try to understand the boundary site, because which is also part of urban fabric, right? And then some environmental factor taken into consideration as a sort of important parameter to generate a sort of optimal solution. Otherwise, also we can generate some not only best solution, not only best solution, also we can create some optimal solution to open the design space for the designers. Because usually what I've experienced is a developer really wanted to get the best option based on the configuration or based on the constraint, but the designer actually play with some parameter within some particular range of the result. Yeah. So this is also the data could be involved as an important parameter for designing and building. Yeah. Yeah, this is the one of my project. I mean, my thesis project to understand the geometry as a sort of the creative tool. So the reason I'm saying is because, as you know, the geometry is most important element, even if we design the urban entity. The reason I'm saying is because the urban is also abstract as a sort of the geometric problem, so that we understanding the basic principle of the geometry is really important to process the spatial information. And also we can, there are many ways of understanding and take advantage of the urban data into the geometry, and then vice versa. Yeah. And this is the other sort of the example to involve the urban data into the design process. So this is the one sort of a project that I developed before. Like at the time, I developed this tool for the landscape designers, because the landscape is a pretty deterministic design process, because we're gonna plant tree or bush, things like that. It has a very clear parameter to predict, right? So that we can actually narrow down important parameter, not only the environmental factor, but also we have the data from the ground, like a pH level, or like the water dampness, like, or soil hardness, things like that. So we can actually create some of a complex system where designer can play with, or yeah, also they can like design their own design process on top of this system, and this system could give us like continuous feedback while you interact with their tool. So this is also kind of opportunity to take advantage of the urban data, for your design process. And also I elaborate this kind of algorithm as a sort of a game, because at the times my nephew and niece, they are really into our environmental factor in the elementary school. So what I'm trying to do is again, how we create a model, simple model that describing sort of a complex system. When I say complex system, I'm not going to sort of the perfectly create the absolute system, but I'm just wanted to make the relationship between one action can create the other chain effects, like a chain actions, and then this chain action can come back to your decision making again. This kind of the circular sort of decision making process could compute. Yeah. again, yeah, the urban the city has not only have numeric data, but also it has like a image data that could be interpreted multiple way, right? And also, I'm personally working actually as the software engineer for the the developer for tooling. So the remote sensing is also very interesting sort of the data set, right? So this is the sort of remote sensing, and we can actually abstract not only just like a color information, but also we can compute like the relationship between their neighbors' pixels. Yeah, so these are sort of the way or methodology to take a look at the urban data as a sort of image which has like the data that you can cook. Yeah, this is the things. And also we can have the other lens of the take a look at our urban environment. Yeah, so energy is also really important things. It's not only just design strategy, but also like we wanted to make like a sustainable design and urban fabric. So in that context, maybe this kind of a tool is not only just consume the existing data, right? But also we can actually creating continuously the sort of pre-processed or like the data as a byproduct. Yeah, based on your action sequences. For example, if you create some like a building here, then we can simulating how the wind path gonna make and what kind of design decision could differentiate your alternative in that context. This is also important things to take a look at the urban data. Yeah, previously we have talked about like some environmental data, but I guess the human being is also really important sort of data in urban context, right? So I mean, in that perspective, I think the particle system could be also create the other sort of the data, from the existing factor. Like in this experimentation, what I'm trying to do is to differentiate like two different sort of the flow. One is the very static flow, and the other one is like a high velocity sort of the flow of people on the street. Also, we can apply this kind of strategy not only to people, but also like other artificial, sort of entity that just like an autonomous vehicle and other trajectory of the urban context. Yeah, and we are reaching almost to the last slide. I have more a little bit, but so I'm going to talk a little bit about the mappings. I guess the mapping is really important and traditional strategy to create or like emerging some insight from the urban context. Urban is pretty complex. I mean, it's way complex than we thought, to be honest, right? Because as we know more and we realize more important factors actually talk to each other, enact each other, and create the other sort of data that also work with the existing data. So I think the mapping is a pretty important thing. And this is one of my product I engaged in the ASRI. So we developed sort of the mapping tool for not only the profession, but also the novice user who has absolute no background about the mapping. Like, how we educate the elementary school or for people who are not like design background, they actually need to know how to read, how to sort of understand the urban context by making their own sort of mapping things. This is the sort of statement of this product. But in that product, I did a lot of research things and this is some other the mapping strategy for the designer who have not strong sort of computation design background. I guess this kind of tool is actually allow us to take advantage of the data in urban context as a location intelligence. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanjay. That was terrific. That was great. Then let's move straight on to Biana. Biana, would you like to share your screen?
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Diana Bogosian. I'm very honored to be here among colleagues and fellow researchers that I truly admire. My background is in architecture, media arts, spatial science, data science, and environmental science. And the research that I'll be presenting today will highlight the way that I approach, let's say, issue of data democratization and relationship of that to future of our cities. So I'm sure you've heard this term big data, and in previous presentations, the importance of information resolution was something that was highlighted. I actually graduated from Columbia University in 2010, and 2010 was a very interesting year in conversations around data, and especially big data in general. That's the year that plus and minus 1 or 2 years, a lot of spatial science and data science programs were established in a lot of universities around the world, but also many open source platforms were released, which allow you to pretty much look at high resolution information for the first time. And that played a really key role in the way that the ongoing research has been developed, which has been done through collaborative research as well as teaching. So in 2010, there was this really interesting article by The Economist, which talked about this concept of data deluge. And I would say for the first time, it was presented to the public this exponential nature of this, let's say, intangible, immaterial, but at the same time, material component that was taking over and forming all of this new disciplines and conversations. At the same time, one thing that one cannot avoid when we're talking about future of cities, and let's say in quotation smart cities, is the issue of privacy and surveillance. So these conversations have been developed in parallel. And one thing that's really fascinating is the fact that the latest report says that in 2021, there's 1 billion cameras that are watching us continuously around the world. And these are numbers that are projected to only grow. And as somebody who's interested in intersection of architecture, environmental science, at the same time media arts, focusing on images and image making has been a very big aspect of this fascination and exploration. So what does it mean when we have 1 billion cameras that are watching over us? And in addition, there's ubiquitous sensors that are more and more covering, whether as part of our refrigerator or as sensors that are embedded in traffic lights. What that raises is this question of, do we have enough data? So have we, since 2010, that this conversation has started, arrived to a point that we feel like we can finally start to make some decisions? So it's projected that amount of data that's being generated and stored is 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. So as you can imagine, this is a very, very large data. But the truth is that when it becomes time to research specific issues, such as environmental issues, what the researchers would very soon realize is the fact that although there's a lot of data that's filling our storages and is constantly being generated, when it comes to maybe addressing specific question, we often do not have enough data. This is a very interesting conversation that extends well beyond environmental data. If you listen to talks in the past few days, one of the things that was brought up was the fact that a lot of researchers spend most of their time cleaning data, creating their own database. So actually, this lack of resolution is a fascinating component to look at, because along with this, if we're not careful, this is where ethics and biases could be jeopardized and questioned. So then what does it mean in terms of, let's say, existing information that we have at hand? So we all are aware of GIS data. So GIS data is something that's not only we've been able to collect in the past 60 or so years, but also we're able to go back and translate a lot of older maps. And along with GIS, we're able to also incorporate remote sensing and begin to create correlations between vector-based information and also raster-based information, and begin to really reveal hidden layers. And these hidden layers could begin to either talk about physical boundaries, but also maybe immaterial boundaries. So in the past few years, research on identifying gases and, let's say, particulate matter using satellite images has been quite important, and they've been advancing. But the truth is that a lot of architects, let's say if for students in studio, if they're they're beginning to work on environmental issues, maybe they're using a platform like Grasshopper, a plugin like Ladybug Honeybee, they're going to come back to these databases. So in this case, acquiring data from weather stations. And although for every city, you're going to be able to find a few different weather stations, the truth is that often these weather stations are lacking in spatial resolution. So often these weather stations are placed somewhere that often is referred to as idealized locations because they need to be protected. These are quite high cost. And along with that, you're not truly sampling, let's say, an ideal scenario. So these devices are, in a sense, they're able to collect high temporal resolution, but they're lacking in spatiality. So this classification that you'll see here is a classification that myself and my colleague Maida Yaguno, who I was teaching at Columbia for many years, and we're doing ongoing research, which you'll see in the presentation that we put forward. And we're looking at relationship of the sensor that's collecting data and relationship to the object that's being observed. So if we look at weather station as an example of local static sensing, it has low spatial resolution. However, it has high temporal resolution. If we're interested in this question of resolution, one method that we've been quite interested in is this method of local mobile sensing. So in this case, if we are interested in high resolution, that could potentially help us in making architectural scale and more microclimatic scale decision making, perhaps we can begin to flip this relationship and start to look for low temporal resolution, but high spatial resolution. So in this case, using pedestrians walking, bikes, buses, etc. Let's say along with this, if we're not relying on weather station, the idea of collecting the data yourself, so if we're looking at, in this case, local mobile sensing, it is true that this method could be quite time consuming. So I was teaching a workshop in capital city of Armenia and Yerevan, and we wanted to do microclimatic analysis, but we realized that because we were lacking GIS data, because the government did not actually release the information, we weren't able to do accurate correlation. So instead, we developed an application, and students volunteered to collect information. However, it took us entire duration of the workshop, which was weeks, to collect 3 location, their canopy information. Same way when, apologies at Skip, at SciArc, I was teaching a short workshop where we were interested in looking at correlation of pollutants and vegetation, and there was lack of information, and students used satellite images to document radius, tree type, etc., and correlate that with weather information. And this took also the entire duration of the workshop. So for the past few years, my research has focused on, through different collaborations, the sociospatial, technical, and political aspects of environmental data collection. So here you're looking at clips from Digital Futures Workshop, actually in 2018, where we used different methods, develop wearables that could either be attached to bicycle, it could be worn as a backpack, or it could be attached to drones, to begin to really understand nuances of real-time data acquisition and try to really understand it in a place where it actually becomes a little bit difficult to overpass firewalls, etc. How do you start to create transparency and diplomacy? And that's been the ongoing research, and at the same time begin to look for different visualization methods that this information could be visualized. So either by using web-based real-time visualization, augmented reality, or virtual reality, we've been looking at how this information could be digested, translated, and correlated with the existing information. So one thing that's been quite interesting, and it goes back to the importance of information diplomacy in this case, has been part of this research has been really understand political nuances of also environmental data or data in general. So some of the early workshops that I was teaching in certain cities, the first experiments were based on actually validation of information. So there's been a history of actually many cities, many governments that have been misreporting the information. So can you, by actually democratizing information collection and visualization, also start to question authorities and kind of agency that governments and these, let's say, people in seats of decision making have over information sharing. And this goes back to what Shoshana Zuboff in her book, Surveillance Capitalism, is talking about. Not only it's about importance of what is the parameter that you decide, but who decides what that information is that is being collected, and who decides who decides. So this really agency over data acquisition, but information visualization has been part of this exploration. So, so with that, can we begin to look for ways that nuances of environmental pollutants can be communicated with the general public? And if we are looking at precedents, perhaps the most important one is the Keeling curve. So this was a curve that was plotted by scientists from Caltech and UCSD, who since 1950, late 1950s, shows the projection of CO2. And this curve has been used for promoting different policy changes, but also the modern environmental movement has been triggered by this. At the same time, NASA's latest visualization has been key in pushing conversation forward. And if we think about more of an architectural example, we know how important Hugh Ferris's representation has been to conversations about zoning regulations and relationship of that to health of the city. So how could this relationship of environmental resolution and visualization be explored further? Now, if you look at a typical information visualization palette, so these are a series of apps that anybody can download that are dealing with environmental pollutants, mainly air quality. And you start to see certain trends, like there's the map for plotting, there's the graph for showing variation, and usually they're using heavy iconography to communicate the information. But we've been tracking the trends of these app users, and we're realizing that same people that are going to download these apps are the same people that are going to show up to community meetings. So it only targets the same niche. So they're not very engaging. So for that, I've been really interested in looking at the work of John Tukey, who was a statistician who proposed this concept of exploratory data analysis, or EDA. He, as a statistician and scientist, was interested in proposing a method where actually it stopped people from making a hypothesis or asking a question before looking at information. So he envisioned visualization methods or space of exploration where would allow people to look at data patterns, and then they can begin to ask questions based on information that's being revealed. So in a sense, it's quite opposite of how the scientific method often operates. So this has been quite inspirational. So the work that I've been doing with air quality and water quality has been starting to look at this intersection of developing devices for data acquisition, whether they've been mobile where people can walk with them, or they've been attached to different platforms, but at the same time, a relationship of interactive media for communicating this information, sometimes to the public, sometimes to the scientists, and sometimes for the policymakers. So along with that, I'm going to just quickly talk about a few quick projects that are trying to make a vertical talk through these components that I discussed. Neil, how am I doing with time?
That's fine. Go ahead. Sure. Fine.
Okay, thank you. So the first project that's been quite key in developing what I'll be showing next was done at University of Southern California, and using highly calibrated, but very low cost sensors that could be used for both that could be incorporated with different devices. So we 3D printed this housing where they could be not only attached to bicycle with also an attachment for cameras. At the same time, the same housing could be flipped and attached to drones. So through a series of experiments, we encouraged a series of volunteers to do data collection over campus that's highly close to the downtown Los Angeles, which is very polluted. So along the way, the camera became an important component. So relationship of image to understanding of our city, especially for architecture and urban design, has been quite key. So in this case, we correlated the temperature acquired from the sensor to temperature gradient, as well as the CO2 reading to pixelation. So here we're leaving the campus, we're on the main street. As we're going more towards the freeway, you're going to see the pixels getting larger, the color turning more red, and we're starting to understand the correlation between the interior of the campus, which has high level of vegetation, and the periphery. So if we look at some of the findings, so upper left side, more of a courtyard condition over campus, high vegetation versus outside. And what is interesting is to start to see that it's not always one-to-one, but it's a very nuanced conversation. At the same time, we were interested in looking at the vertical reading. The same housing was attached to drones, and we were able to program the vertical reading and in this case, scan the buildings around campus. Through many testing and user study, in this case, we realized that when we have actually the data plotted along with the visualization, people are able to understand the nuances a little bit better, so they had better response. So here we saw how temperature dropped as the drone went higher, also CO2 drop. We're going to see the same drone going lower, and we're going to start to see actually the resolution of, in this case, CO2. It's becoming higher, and at the same time, temperature is rising. And we realized that these two parameters alone were enough for us to make a point about the complexity. The entire campus was scanned back and front of the buildings, and we were able to, after parameterization, and this was published in Arcadia in 2016, if you're interested in the paper, we were able to kind of identify nuances. So if we look at these 3 points along campus, we realized there was a really high polluted corner, Jefferson and Figueroa, and realized after many studies that that was due to the duration of the traffic light. And this allowed us to start a conversation with the provost of campus and begin to think about, can we communicate this to the city? Can we start to incorporate a sensor along with the traffic light where idling could be correlated with the environmental reading? So this was the first kind of indication of how this visualization could allow us to think about policy change. So after that, we were commissioned to do a pilot project for Seoul Architecture Biennale in 2017. This was funded by an innovation grant from Princeton University, and along with my colleague Maida Yaguna as part of her postdoc, we developed the sensing kits that could, with using high pull magnets, they could be placed on buses, circle the city throughout the Biennale, and at the same time, a real-time visualization communicated the location of these buses and the reading to people in the space. We developed 2 AR apps, which allowed people to, building on the USC project, use color as a correlation of value, so reading from the nearest weather station and the buses. At the same time, working with the city, and this took about 6 months to get 30 years of archival data from the city to then begin to really map different parameters. So we created an archival augmented reality app over a 2 meter by 2 meter map where people could walk over it, look at real-time versus archival information, isolate it based on parameter, turn on and off topography. And what was really playful about this was the scale of the component, the scale of the map allowed people to understand information as a spatial component, allowed children to be curious about this, but at the same time, it was very engaging also for the government agencies that also visited the exhibition. Building on this, after correlating the information, we realized that even we were lacking spatial resolution and further study was needed. This is also published. I'll be happy to share the sources. I'm going to end with a very short video of a project that's still ongoing. It's part of my dissertation. So along with this, the interest was to begin to merge these studies together and really begin to think about an existing IoT structure. In this case, was placed on USC campus, and really start to think about how this approach could be more gamified. So in this case, this MVP augmented reality app guides the students to the nearest sensor station. It also allows them to look at the information kind of beyond the box. So it kind of unveils what is inside the box. And at the same time, they're able to look at archival data. They're able to look at, let's say, locations that are, let's say, high pollutants. They're able to plant trees. They're able to really start to think about how, let's say, scale of pollution on campus could be understood using different methods. So I'm going to stop here, and sorry that it took longer to explain the projects. Thank you.
No, don't apologize. Don't apologize at all. That was great. Thank you. We'll come back and we'll have some questions at the end. I want to just as a way, by way of introducing Sumin, maybe I can just say just a few words about the notion of the augmented architecture, we say. So we've spoken about the informational architect, and now, in some sense, we move on to the notion of augmentation of the augmented architect, and how we can use some of these tools to somehow empower the architect even more. The idea that somehow we can use technology as a kind of an extension of ourselves has obviously been opened up and raised by Andy Clark and David Chalmers. This is back in the 1990s, and the notion of the extended mind became absolutely crucial to rethinking what it was to be human in some senses, because once you began to develop a cell phone and you began to store all the phone numbers on the cell phone and everything else, could you not perceive this technology as part of what they defined as the extended mind? Very controversial at the time, but nonetheless it's proved to be, I think, a very insightful observation that then has been moved on to other kind of theses. Natural Born Cyborgs is a book that Andy Clark produced a few years later, where he takes that notion further, and basically what he's saying is that we have become cyborgs. It's been we've used this technology, it's become part of how we think, it's been absorbed in many ways. And the key concept here, it comes from the world of neuroscience, and it's a notion of the plasticity of the brain, that the human brain has this capacity to adapt to these new technologies and to start thinking through these technologies. So he actually, although people like Catherine Hales have been saying that we've become post-human, he's saying no, we're quintessentially human, because it is precisely this kind of plasticity of the human brain that allows us to become these cyborgs. Dandy was, of course, he was a guest at Digital Futures 2 years ago. He came to Shanghai, and one of the comments he made at the time was this: actually, he was unhappy with the cover, because he's saying that actually we don't have to look like something out of a science fiction movie, because we're all cyborgs. We're all using these things. Even a walking stick makes us a cyborg. So it hasn't got to be futuristic. It's how we operate, and increasingly we operate in this world today. This is a kind of comment, of course, that's been made by Elon Musk, where he literally explains that in some way. All of us already are cyborgs. You have a machine extension of yourself in the form of your phone and your computer and all your applications. You are already superhuman. And I think that's a kind of a really interesting kind of concept to think about in terms of how we've been empowered and enabled and indeed augmented by these new technologies. And in fact, even with the context of AI itself, Joy Ito made this comment back in 2017, we shouldn't see it as a question about AI versus humans, but rather how AI can be a kind of like a supplement to a kind of a tool that extends the capacity of the human. So we're talking less about AI than extended intelligence. The other term that was used was intelligence augmentation. So with that, I would like to invite Sumin to say a few words about the work that she's been doing on the theme of the augmented architect. Welcome, Sumin.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think my presentation will kind of showcase what exactly Neil was just explaining. Hi everybody, and I'm very honored to be here today. And today my topic, as Neil was introduced, is going to be about augmentation, and in the context of architecture and technology, and as of this lecture series. And no doubtedly, and as discussed in a lot in this lecture series, AI is becoming a huge part of our lives. And we have to acknowledge that we human beings are no longer the only creative beings. And it is time to re-establish a healthy and meaningful relationship between human intelligence and machine intelligence. And this book suggests that this new relationship should be proactively established by our workspaces, immediately, and especially by the leadership. Physicist Michio Kaku, who gave a series of precise predictions of our future based on scientific evidence, and he predicted that in near future, architects will be practicing using AR lenses. And not a surprise, commercialization of augmented reality glasses started to open up a lot of possibilities, especially since the release of 2016 Microsoft HoloLens. And market researchers also predict exponential growth of the markets of AR headsets and related technologies in near future. And the use of AR technology in warehouses and construction sites will become common and granted. And not only that, designers started to explore new possibilities of this technology to create new structural possibilities and new aesthetics. And to really question what different kinds of physical spaces that we can construct that are different from before we introduce this technology. And such as this pavilion constructed by my colleagues, Guilin Zhang, Cameron Newhan, and Igor Pantic, we have tried to answer a few such questions about what kind of different spaces that we can create with the introduction of new technology and being augmented with devices and data, as us as ordinary humans. And furthermore, many believe that there will be much more that is coming. And as technologies are evolving, the author of this book, Brett King, states that we are living in the augmented age, where machines and devices are getting closer to our bodies. As we are already augmented with smartphones, we are already cyborgs. So he's stating that after the internet age, we are entering the augmented age, and our all daily lives are going to be changed with a lot of these technologies that are very close to our bodies. This video shows a lot of futuristic, and also, of course, Elon Musk stated that augmentation is essentially about how humans can more intuitively and easily control machines and communicate with data. So I define augmentation as a human enhancement, amplification by using various tools, devices, machines, robots that are close to the human physical body and or controlled ergonomically and intuitively. And these tools are not only AR headsets, but includes all kinds of devices, and especially wearables. And for example, in this book lists out a lot of contemporary wearable robots known as exoskeletons or prosthetics. And for example, wearable robots include prosthetic limbs for disabled, which can be implemented and controlled with muscle movements or brainwave signals. And here are some examples of how different technologies are explored and researched by other people. There are also wearables can return haptic feedback. There are also robots can be remotely controlled. And also they can help workers to be stronger. And the exoskeletons designed for construction workers have been improving factory warehouse pipelines, predominantly in automobile industry. And some construction sites also started to employ this system to improve the process. However, there is still a lack of design research, in my opinion, questioning how these technologies can fundamentally change the way we design and construct, and what kind of new processes will nurture new kinds of architectural aesthetics and typologies. So how differently can we build? So that is the fundamental question we should ask or kind of explore. Obviously, I don't have much work to answer about exoskeletons, but in the next few slides, I would like to show some of my work that have been explored with the use of AR headsets to try to answer the same question: what kind of new construct or new aesthetics can we produce, or new spatial qualities and typologies? And in this video, I'm going to fast forward. In this video shows the work from the Bartlett Research Cluster 9 since 2016, taught together with Alvaro Lopez, and now it's taught by Igor Pantic and Jose Pareja, and also Alvaro Lopez. And our students, we have created a number of projects that are really exploring the use of augmentation, especially augmented reality headsets together with computer sensor and vision sensoring devices to communicate the constructing processes during the design and making, and testing out a lot of different material system, material crafting processes to create different portfolios to try to answer the similar questions and explore. So these are some just different projects that I'm gonna keep on playing. So for example, this one on the screen is showing how to use similar timber, bent timber to create this kind of complex structure that is algorithmically designed. And we also had the chance to test this method as a landscape installation. And during the pandemic, without being able to actually visit the site and build it by our own self, we were able to train the unskilled student volunteers on site to build our installation with only remote communication. So this was only possible by the use of AR. And we also introduced a cloud-based digital twin platform, which allowed us to supervise the local site from remote locations. So we were able to review the on-site process and from remotely, and the local crews were building it by the instruction from the AR lenses. So this was a two-way communication enabled by this technology. So these are the making process. And here you will see how we were, a little bit later, you'll see how we were, this is a digital twin platform. We were able to review the site process in daily basis to kind of compare the digital model and the real process. And as showed briefly before earlier, designed by Guilin Zhang, Kang Minhua, and Igor Pantich, and we managed to build 100% handcrafted steam-bent timber pavilion. Also thanks to the augmented reality technology, we were able to execute algorithmically designed loose forms quite quickly and directly into the actual product with relatively short preparation time and minimal amount of optimization and rationalization. So all of the brackets are also handcrafted as such. Maybe you'll show some on-site assembly process. And that's the loose form with pretty good comparable accuracy and relative accuracy. And so that's the resulting structure. Yeah, and most recently, we are currently building another version of this. So this is an ongoing project for a Saya gallery exhibition. And as we want to move on from being pure pavilion, but want to kind of demonstrate architectural applicability, we started to consider serious architectural problems such as enclosure, insulation, and glazing, and so on. And we are also trying to improve the working pipeline to be a little more efficient to be able to pre-assemble bigger panels and parts off-site. And here are some current process documentation, so some process photos. And it is still under construction right now, but we have few pieces. And here are some visions that what we are trying to create as a sample house. As a conclusion, I want to argue that the future of AI is not some kind of human-looking android, but an ordinary person augmented with technologies, just like the Iron Man. And as us as architects, we should really think about that kind of technologies and how to improve our physical realities and constructs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samin. That's absolutely beautiful work. Really, really gorgeous. Let me just, I wanted to just maybe add something to that, just briefly, then we can maybe open up to discussions about some of these issues. So let me go just one just comment really to think about the possibility of that augmentation, not just existing in terms of the inhabitant of the city, but also the city itself, that could be in some way enhanced by the use of AI. And I just wanted to raise one of the issues that have been that has been suggested about the possibility of it. In other words, we could look at the whole logic of the swarm that has been around for some time now, is to suggest that there is something we can conceptualize, a kind of connection between the way that any multi-agent system operates and a certain form of intelligence that emerges in any of these systems. So the title of Stephen Johnson's book, or the subtitle, The Connected Lives of Ants, Brains, Cities and Softwares, is to kind of suggest that maybe what we have with the city itself can operate through it like any other multi-agent system, and that includes neural networks and so on, can itself become to operate like a form of brain. There is this form of intelligence, in other words, at work within the city itself. On the left-hand side, the first book that was produced about this by these three scientists from the Santa Fe Institute, and then on the right-hand side, something that Roland and I published a few years ago. But I want to take that notion of the city as a kind of form of intelligent system and think about how we can be able to use AI to enhance that in some way. And this is the concept that has been developed in China by Alibaba. They have this notion of the city brain, which is to say how you might use this concept of the digital twin and use AI to kind of enhance the performance of the city, in particular to look at traffic systems and how one can maybe control the traffic flow to improve the access to an accident, even to identify accidents before they've actually, as soon as they've happened, and to overcome the problem of traffic jams at rush hour and so on. And that, to my mind, is kind of like an interesting new development. They deployed it initially in the city where Alibaba is itself, which is an incredibly Huazhou, a city with real problems in terms of its traffic, and then elsewhere in China, increasingly in other cities around Asia, in Kuala Lumpur. I'm looking forward to the time when they start engaging with LA to improve the traffic there. The possibility then of thinking about how you might take that concept of AI as extended intelligence and think about the city as having intelligence and using AI to enhance that, to make the city operate in a much more efficient way. So, and this is, I mean, there's not much to be seen about this because it's all kind of it's on the screen, as it were. But nonetheless, the effect has already been quite significant in how we can improve the operations of a city itself. So I just want to suggest that there is, and I'm not sure the city's going to learn to think. I don't know, AI makes you think as such, but I mean, AI doesn't think. But nonetheless, the possibility of taking the concept that Samin has been sketching out of the augmented architect, the architect enhanced through these new technologies, and indeed how AI could be seen as an extension of human intelligence, to think how the city itself could also be enhanced and how we can improve its operations. I won't say too much about that, but of course, the way in which we might integrate the self-driving car becomes central to the way in which we might operate together. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point here and open up to some discussions. I guess I wanted to maybe if I could just kick things up. First of all, to say, well, anybody has any questions, please put the questions in the chat. If you're on YouTube, you can put it in the YouTube chat, and we can relay them to the discussion, the panelists here. And if the attendees have got any questions, also please put them forward. I guess I wanted to bring Violet back in, and thank you, Violet, for this. A long time since we saw the very beginning of the session, but I want to bring you back in. And the comment that one of my students made, Darren Ockett, just this last semester, said that if there are two game changers in the world today, it's basically AI and COVID. I mean, the world is not the same after that. I wanted just to ask you, in some senses, and maybe this is a question that also goes to the other panelists in some senses, is, I mean, how are we to, I mean, the city is inevitably going to be changing. And how are you accommodating those ways of operating? I mean, I don't know to what extent we will all be going back to work in the same way. I mean, for sure, I've got to say that this is an example of how we can operate in terms of you know, in terms of education and bringing people all over the world together. Which I think is incredible in many ways. It helps us environmentally. It also kind of gives us this immediate access and this space to think together. And I often use this term computation to really talk about what's happening in the Zoom space where we're bringing these minds together. But it seems to me that kind of like, we're in a new world now, and we don't know quite where we're going or what's going to happen. Will we return? And many of us, we won't return completely to normal, to the previous model, shall we say? But how does the kind of the question of COVID factor into the kind of the delve thinking about the city? Maybe Violet.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's been interesting because we're navigating this live with everyone else. And so what's been surprising to me is just working with developers. We're seeing the changes immediately, from the subtleties of developers wanting larger unit sizes because people are spending more time at home, to wanting to look at how at adaptive reuse through generative design, to really looking at the 15-minute city. So I think generative design has a big part to play in the future of cities, because we're seeing, especially with COVID, we're seeing so many drastic changes, or changes that happen so quickly. And so it's important when we plan the next development that we are measuring the behavior. And the behavior is things like, what is the program and the use and where people move over time. And what's great about simulations is that you can test things before you build them. So that allows us to understand what happens actually if we, we can generate a bunch of models and say like, oh, hey, look, if we expect that 50% of people aren't going to work and instead they're doing this other thing, like what program should this part of a district actually be? So I think that's a major thing, is just really the ability to simulate different uses and behavior. Really allows us to adapt to different uses and behavior in the future. And I think the other piece, I think people have said, COVID didn't change the world as much as like push us into the future, or like teach us things we already knew, but maybe intensified them. I think another big focus for us has been around equity and sustainability issues and thinking about affordability. So I think that's just, COVID has like brought that into a crisper focus for us. And you've heard me talk a lot about financials, and financials are bread and butter, but really being able to quantify and measure these different aspects is really what allows, and even translate that into the economic viability of something. When you measure it and you see it, then you can respond to it. And when you look at developments today, a lot of times, like measuring some of these quality of life aspects, it's not like a default. And so having that as part of the default is really important.
Yeah, and I guess once you've got a model that's been set up, you can use it to test out different scenarios very easily. Though I don't know. We've got yet to see what's going to happen in the future, but it just struck me that one of the comments I made during COVID, the very beginning last year, it's something that's been on my mind for some years, but is the idea that actually once you become more mobile, in the sense that you realize that you can have meetings on Zoom and have education on Zoom, it doesn't mean that place is unimportant, because actually it means that you can be anywhere. It means that place is really important, that suddenly, all of a sudden, all these considerations have become really have a huge impact. And I imagine that the real estate industry is something that has to be really adapting right now, that you get different little patterns of behavior that are already there. No, that's it's super interesting. Maybe I could just put that comment to also to NJ and Biana and maybe even Sumin to think how because clearly with Sumin it's been a kind of crucial issue in how to get things built. I know that for the Venice Finale, Philip Beasley and his team were using similar techniques to get something built remotely. But how has COVID been really a game changer in each of your spheres? Maybe NJ, I could start with them.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I guess I didn't change much because I know as a software developer, I'm usually work with computers. So as long as I'm able to access the internet and the table, I guess I think this is the place where I can work and stay. And personally, right now I'm in New York. I mean, even if my workplace is in the California. And I mean, the place become, as you mentioned, become like it's not important, I guess, because also I'm basically from South Korea. So whenever I have friends and my relatives, I'm able to meet the Zoom space. So I mean, after COVID-19, people get familiar with the technology. I mean, it accelerating the people to push people to expose to the new technology that basically connect people regardless of the distance or places. I guess that one is a really important thing. And also, when think about the different types of generation, I mean, the new generation gonna have a little different sort of memory and understanding of the city and places where against what we already have, I guess. So in that context, I don't know, we couldn't imagine or predict, but I just imagine like, after several decades, when they become sort of important people in the society, then they have a little bit different understanding and interpretation, just like the picture that I showed you in my presentation. Because maybe the place is important, or a school, or some physical contact could be important for our generation. But I guess the COVID-19 is kind of accelerated the sort of emphasize one particular situation where we need to stuck at home, and also the distances become like meaningless. And also recently I met my friends in the Nobelux, which is sort of metaverse world, which is quite interesting because I guess sometimes I can play more compared to what I really meet my friends in the Seoul, for example. I think that kind of things could be affect not only our behavior, but also our future sort of physical city, I guess. So that the architect or urban designer, I think, need to have the other sort of lens of looking at what the future gonna looks like based on the event. I mean, based on the COVID-19 outbreak, I guess.
Yeah, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, sure. Maybe a general comment. I'm personally very critical of using artificial intelligence. The term term artificial intelligence in general. It's really not something that I really like to frame my research around, although for statistical modeling and evaluation, I do use machine learning libraries and methods, but I'm very careful not to, as much as possible, stay away from the way that a lot of conversation around architecture and artificial intelligence is being framed currently. I find it a little bit problematic as we're beginning to kind of project this otherness as this kind of detachment and as this, let's say, different level of agency that we're starting to assign to this thing called artificial intelligence. I think it's problematic when sometimes you hear designers are talking about an AI, or so once we begin to kind of talk about it as this external component and maybe not understand that actually the way that history has been developed, these terms have been maybe exchanged. And let's say 10 years ago, if you wanted to apply for a grant and if you use artificial intelligence in the heading, you didn't have a good chance of getting the grant. But let's say these days, turning that wording and calling it artificial intelligence would give you certain types of grants. So in a sense, in the work that I'm interested in looking at and future of data and cities, I'm pretty much still interested in just understanding this as statistical evaluations, looking at predictive models. And my research or my curiosity is more about the information that allows you to then plug into these models. Interesting enough, actually the most popular book in statistic so far has been this book that was published in 1914 by Darrell Huff, and it's called How to Lie with Statistics. And so this issue around bias and data and artificial intelligence is something that goes back, over 70 years. So I feel like at least my interest in looking at how COVID has affected the way that conversations around cities has evolved is the way that, let's say, data transparency has changed, the way that policies have changed, and the way that we started to see these trends when people stopped to drive, when people started to drive again, and how that affected environment and other, let's say, urban nuances. So for me, that's been quite interesting. At the same time, something that's been actually quite curious in terms of research, and this was something that I didn't show today, we received a National Science Foundation fund to do a project for City of Miami in response to COVID. And I'm sure you're very well aware of, in the beginning, architects began to 3D print PPEs, and there was this movement to do this DIY approach to building masks and pretty much resource sharing. And what we realized was that it wasn't really about spending plastic and resources to 3D print these masks. It was about kind of lack of coordination of information. So the application that we've been developed, which is using machine learning and natural language processing, hopefully I'll be able to publish and release the information soon, is looking at how to work with Chamber of Commerce in the city of Miami Beach to redistribute information and create, in a sense, an exchange market between people that have the supplies and people that have the demand. So I think for me, I started the talk by talking about lack of, or this issue of information resolution. And what I'm realizing is that it's not just lack of information resolution, but it's about actually hiccups and mismanagement of information still, which is costing a lot of resources and a lot of actually workflows not to be fluid. So I think as much as it's exciting to think about how, we're going to have this brain-like, this smart cities that are just, compatible with everything and working, and it just makes everything better. There's so many hiccups along the way that we still have a lot of work to do. So I think as much as it's exciting to think about future of cities as this seamless space of flow, like Manuel Castel was talking about it, there's a lot of things to figure out along the way. Thanks.
Yeah, I guess. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Vienna, you reminded me of something in a sense that the conversation I had before with the person who is an artist but rely on the machine learning technology. But in the conversation, she said, like, in general, the machine learning is more about like generalizing some event or some situation where like a phenomena as into some particular category or some I mean the tangible things, right? But maybe autonomous vehicle or other important sort of, some question which has an exact answer, that kind of things, I guess possibly in general the machine learning could be sort of optimal solution for that question. But I guess what about we are designer, right? basically build something that we never before sometimes, right? So I think in that sense, we need to think about like how we're dealing with the minority report for that the machine learning technology. I mean, my understanding of the machine learning is more about like generalizing something and encapsulating into some common pattern or common things. But at the same time, I guess the most essential and important insight is sometimes it's not something from our pattern or something our agreement. It's more about like something that could potentially or long run or short term something. How can I say, like just like a human intuition or human like a sense, I guess. So in that sense, I'm sort of also little worry, not worry. I mean, always like take care of sort of the fact that we could miss the minority thought related to, I mean, in our topic like urban designing or something, I guess. In that context, also we need to respect like cultural aspect. Also, this is my room. So I'm the guy who use my room. So in that case, that I don't care about like a common sense or a common agreement, right? So I mean, what this kind of question? How do we design the network or model for the trained machine? I guess I think this is also the question that architect or urban designer need to start thinking to as a sort of substitution, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can just pick up on something that Violet said in the beginning about somehow. Well, in some ways, I mean, we always had the capacity to do all these things, right? I mean, we could pay online before, we could, have Zoom. We just didn't bother, And this is, in some ways, it's. I think what COVID did was jolt us out of our familiar routine and force us to open up to these new ways of operating. And what I find interesting is actually, while we talk about maybe how we're adapting to our tools in a way, it actually has a way in which what is emerging is a new set of practices that are informed by the possibilities that we have suddenly realized are available. Now, to my mind, educationally, this is the most important thing. And I'm trying to think about how we can make a doctoral program operate and how we can also, the next few days, we have this new platform for we're calling the Digital Consortium, where we bring doctoral students all together, and that's come out of that discussion in some ways. But I think, in some senses, what to my mind, it's with AR in particular. It's something it was always there as an option, but suddenly we really realize how we can use AR. So I just want to kind of to us, Samina, how do you see these new tools generating new forms of practice, new forms of design, new forms of fabrication, and so on?
Yeah, I think certainly because of COVID, like we had to really clarify what kind of tasks we really need physical presence, or what kind of tasks we can do it remotely. And definitely like use of AR and Zoom and all these like digital twin platforms and also all those things became more like critical for helping us to be non-present physically, but performing our tasks. So I think those tasks that we normally needed to be there have been replaced thanks to these technologies. So I think these technologies, one of them were augmented reality glasses, of course, yeah. So probably in that case, like it was a really probably good chance for our like types of research were really tested out the possibility and really pushed like forcefully. We were forced to push like not presenting, not going to the site, and being able to train people remotely and to communicate it through this kind of tools. And it was I think was really good kind of brain kind of training processes. So we were like really clarified what tasks we really need to be divided in as such, what kind of things that we can do as a designers, or what kind of things only computer can deliver, what kind of things can anybody, any ordinary people or unskilled people can do. So I guess any kind of practices has that kind of experience, really dividing and clarifying that kind of tasks. And I think especially a lot of like physical fabrication related work had this kind of experience. And I want to have another aspect about like education, because normally in school environment, we normally ask students to make physical models to kind of really train them to understand the scale. And I think it has been always a very important part of education, but this has been like forcefully shut. So in this year, of course, like having AR glasses for everybody was impossible. But actually in our school environment in SIA, for example, we had to kind of push students to render their physical digital models as physical models. So like we forcefully asked them to make the textures similar to like MDF textures, for example. Yeah, and I think that kind of different tasks that have been emerging, and the education has been also affected because of that kind of, because in architecture worlds, the understanding of scale is really important, and the physical models have been always a very important, very efficient ways to kind of educate that. But I think that will be also replaced by some kind of other means, but AR definitely will be very, very handy in the coming future to kind of communicate that.
Yeah, one of the things I just wanted to maybe bring this in and we can move on, but just one of the issues today, and I was reading in the news about there's some company in New York that's insisting everybody comes back in September, right? And in some ways, the really interesting thing is that now we can imagine possibilities that, if I were going to start a new university, not that I want to do that, but I would make it online now, but the problem really is almost that all these universities have these physical buildings. They've got the residential blocks and things. They want to fill them. So they're kind of saying, let's go back. And many people in some ways are constrained by, negative equity. You can't just simply abandon the office block and things because you've got money tied up in it. And the real issue now is how much you're constrained by property investment. I don't know if Violet want to say anything about that, but I think that's the fascinating question. The tension that's going on between these new ways of operating, that we suddenly realize we can do this now, but we're almost hamstrung by the existing structures that are constraining us in some way.
It's funny, you almost have to see all this post-rationalization because of all the sunk cost and all these assets. You kind of need to make it work. I think people recognize that there's something really valuable about being together, but we also recognize that there's something really valuable about all of us being the same size on a Zoom screen. And there's like a kind of, there are different patterns of behavior that emerge where we get better at documenting decisions that are made and equitably sharing them, and it makes it easier to do things asynchronously and all these other things. We think like even some of the examples that Sumin was showing, in many ways, I think products like Delve will become more important because we need more mechanisms for a kind of centralizing knowledge, where there's ways for people in different areas to kind of be looking at the same thing and seeing it from many different perspectives and sharing information via things like maps and yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but.
No, I was just thinking actually the educational thing is an interesting one, because I had a student who last semester, the fall semester, and he was saying, I feel like I'm in the front row of a lecture hall every time. And actually, I completely changed. I was going to give some lectures, and I said, okay, let's just have a discussion. And we had instead of having a 110 person lecture, it was a 110 person seminar where everyone could feel empowered to be involved in some way. So yeah, that's for sure, it's changed education. And yeah. So I don't know if we've got any questions coming in from the chat at all, but feel free to send them in. Yeah. So what do you kind of, maybe I could ask with Violet, because I've seen your, I mean, this, you people were telling me about your work before I even came across, and I had a discussion with Amrit, your colleague, at one point, and we made contact, Amrit dear, and it was amazing. I'm glad we had this view. But how do you see the next step in terms of your process, and what do you see as the next development that you're going to start engaging with with Delve?
Well, we're actively working with a number of developers, and also actively looking for other people that or other development teams that are interested in working with us. I think just in general, where I see this going in the future is that it's going to be more, it's kind of going to be almost like mundane and commonplace, where the more you see developments done in this way, you just almost look back and laugh at, like, oh, why did we do it that way before? It was so painful. And anyone that went to architecture school really knows it. knows the pain of manual processes. So I think something that there was this documentary that I thought was a really great analogy, that was the history of Pixar, and everyone was freaking out when all these animation companies were emerging, and they were like, they're gonna automate all the jobs for all the animators, and they're destroying the creativity of the industry. But what you actually ended up seeing was animation products are super commonplace now. What you see is an investment in other things, like the storyboarding, the narrative, the developing the feel of the environment, but you're not spending time like doing textures, and you're not spending time standard character animation type processes. So I think there's a lot of similarities there to where the field is going, where we're going to continue to see creativity, but we're going to see a lot of products that just allow people to invest more in maybe the interesting bits.
Yeah, what always strikes me about these things is the way that change happens. And in other words, there's always been this speculation about the future, and there's going to be this moment of singularity or something, and everyone's thinking about this explosion and so on. This is what Ray Kurzweil seems to describe it. But actually, really what's happening, I mean, the description I used the other day was, it's a bit like boiling a frog. You always don't notice the change, and it happens very, very gradually. I was shocked by this discussion that would last in the fall semester, when my student said that he just announced that his Tesla car had become fully self-driving, and that's the way things happen, is gradual incremental change, to the point that and you adapt to it, and then you look back on it, you say, well, I can't imagine, why did we do that in the past? It just kind of begins to develop in an interesting kind of new way. We have a question from Daniela in the discussion. Let me just raise this. Thank you for the panelists for the wonderful and thought-provoking presentations. Our speculative digital futures, in the plural, will likely manifest through many creative combinatorics, I can't pronounce that word, of technologies that continue to evolve as we interweave them in novel, unexpected ways. The event Digital Futures would lead one to believe that the whole world is inevitably moving towards a definitive and singular AI future, which in fact is already here. It is striking that we are not discussing, for example, the monumental impact of blockchain technologies and experiments, not crypto, but the tech powers that power it, the deployment of digital twins to test social synergies, and gamification of architecture, the narratives, the spatial web, etc. There's another question there as well. Well, we had a discussion about. I'm a bit skeptical about cryptocurrency, but then I was this morning. I was corrected by Erin Manning and saying, but they're being used in all sorts of creative and positive ways as well. It's not just anyway. But I mean, I think there are many different sort of ways of doing it, and I think, to my mind, the comment I made then was really, it's important for us to really get our heads around these technologies, so that we can use this for the benefit of society. There was a comment that Douglas Rushkoff made back, this is 20 years ago, when the computation came on stream, the internet was there, we all imagined this incredible future of, emancipatory future, this new world, brave new world, and we just got spam, right? So it's really kind of important about how do we understand these technologies and make them work for us. I don't know if you want any comments on that comment by Daniela. There's also a point there that Daniel Bolojan has raised, is usually you have progress when multiple technologies converge. Now that's an interesting kind of point.
Yeah, what I mean by that is because also yesterday we were talking about which will be the progress in architecture and AI. And if you think about the reason why AI started to develop so much lately, it's mostly because of social media. Suddenly we started to have data to train and to work with this kind of networks. Yeah. Before then, we didn't have actually data to be able to test if the networks are actually working. So that's what I mean. Yeah, there are multiple technologies that have to converge in a way for progress to happen in the end. And also in architecture, probably there are multiple technologies, not only AI, that have to be in a way pushed at a certain level, and then maybe we can start to see a real material in a way impact in the field.
I mean, it always strikes me that the fact that on our cell phones we have everything is converging there literally. That is a kind of astonishing thing that I never imagined how you could operate that way at all. Yeah.
I just wanted to make also a point about what you were discussing with Violet, and I think again going back to this kind of idea of selection and sorting things, AI generating a lot of things. I started thinking about this aspect of we always talk about creativity when it comes to artistic creativity, yeah? And but if we look at scientific creativity, for example, or mathematical, when it comes to coming up with beautiful, let's say, theories, you can start to think of maybe creativity there means a sort of meaningful random search in a way, or a meaningful structuring of how you're searching for the right things, let's say, yeah. And without going on that kind of rabbit hole of what creativity is now, maybe we can say that, certain peoples have talent to shape in which direction they are searching for new things. And maybe that's what talent is, just kind of ability in a way to, because also Costas was saying something like, all the shapes, they already exist in a way, everything is already there. It's just a matter of searching for them. Yeah, we didn't discover them. And almost like then, depending on your talent, how you know to structure this kind of infinite space of design and how you are able to structure it and to navigate it and sort it and so on, yeah? And maybe that's what creativity is, I don't know.
So one thing that struck me, NJ, was this. I was amazed by that. In those illustrations you showed me, showed us I think it was like the age of the steam engine, or the train and things, and how they thought the future was going to be. That really was incredible, because it kind of reminded me when and there was the whole buildings being kind of on a train line that were being moved. I mean, it struck me of the comment that Henry Ford made, is that if you ask people what they wanted, they would say faster horses. And how do you step outside? And in some ways, this goes back to your kind of question of Daniel, you've raised it several times. How do the real game changes when you not just interpolating or extrapolating, but actually thinking about moves that go beyond that? And from that point of view, I've got to say that the one person who kind of really amazes me over and over again is Elon Musk, because he kind of completely changed the name of the game, and you start thinking about things in a radically new sort of way, and you wonder why you hadn't thought about that before. But in some senses, this comes back to the kind of the theme of the the reason why I chose the title, The Hitchhiker's Guide to Artificial Intelligence, because for him, this book, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, was a real game changer. And it's really a question, and you know the story. They end up with this: what's the meaning, the ultimate answer to the meaning of the universe and everything? It's 42, which is totally confusing. And then you discover they don't know what the question is. But if you really address the question, and if you address it in an intelligent way, you don't just get faster horses. You get a new paradigm in ways of thinking. And I think that, to my mind, is what I'm seeing right now with some of the work that Verlat's been showing about how you can radically rethink the model of how we operate just by using these tools as thinking tools, of new ways of thinking.
I have one thought about your sort of question. So, I mean, I'm sort of designer, but software engineer at the same time. So I'm really like the technology, particularly the software technology for applying design industry. But I guess, I'm work as a developer as a full-time, but it's really hard to keep up with the speed of the development of the software, because individual people, develop their own like algorithm or library and then share it throughout the internet. And every second, actually, you can find something new, and people develop something other library to overtake the existing things. I think it's really hard to understand or keep up with the speed of the development, I guess. But I think in that context, maybe we can just focusing on what we really wanted to do. I mean, because these are tools, right? So actually, we don't need to understand entire tech tree or entire sort of ecosystem of the tool, I guess. So I think the most important thing is that what I wanted to design, or what I wanted to make, I guess. So for example, like, actually, one of my friends, he asked me, NJ, I'm creating some sort of a paper to submit, the local government to get the project. But he asked me, do you have any idea which can possibly involve the 5G technology to the architecture, design industry, things like that. But I don't know. I mean, my understanding of 5G is reduce the latency against the 4G, right? So think about like autonomous vehicle. Like the latency is really important. If you delayed like a 10 milliseconds as a latency, and then actually if you drive like your car around 8 or 90 miles, the 10 milliseconds is actually it's a lot, yeah. So in that context, I think I'm just keep thinking like what kind of job or tasks which is really important for the latency, for example. I mean, in that context, I guess the first one is what I really wanted to make and what kind of tool I need, I guess. So that kind of thing is important sort of a map to take your journey for learning and understanding the technology, because there's a lot of like new technology every day. It's really hard to keep up with, even developers, engineers, I guess. So I think my thought is I think a tool is tool. So just understanding tool, but at the same time, most importantly, what I wanted to achieve, and then what kind of opportunity or technologies available for realize my sort of design into your work. I think this is one sort of comment that I thought about your question.
Yeah, the question of time is, I mean, I'm working on this book, right? And it's really frustrating because I'm working with as an industry that is actually a little bit slow to respond. And there are certain, I can't change anything in the book, and it comes out in October or something. And, the information is going to be out of date by the time it happens, and I think that becomes a kind of crucial kind of factor in the way that we operate today. It's the speed of change, and how do we have as existing structures that can adapt to those things. And I had a conversation when I was in an Uber car once, where the driver was telling me about how the way in which information spreads instantaneously is having a huge impact on kids. That someone says something and all of a sudden 5,000 people know about it. So I think there are also some other questions that follow on from that simple kind of question of the speed of operations that need to be dealt with. I just, I'm at the back of my mind, I'm thinking about, Violet's sort of situation, and how the radically changing world that we're operating in, which is so kind of different to the kind of very static world of real estate, and how real estate is going to be able to adapt to to worlds that are changing rapidly, absolutely rapidly. I don't know if that's something that'll be factored into your operations, Violet, at all. But
I think that's what's so useful about understanding behavior, and also why program is so important. It's not just the physical, it's also its program and use and behavior. And so I think buildings have shifted so much over time. And even now I'm in a building that was built in the 1800s. And I'm sure it was a hoop skirt factory before. So, and now I'm living in it. So, it just kind of shows how much we repurpose things over time. So I think we'll be okay. We'll find new uses. It's just about kind of being creative about how things shift, and being able to understand the characteristics of a place and how they can shift. Like, what are the affordances of this city or building in order to support other uses and programs.
But that presumably is going to have an impact on the way that we plan in terms of multiple programming.
Absolutely. I feel like the old model has been think of a building, think of the forms, model the forms in Rhino. It's all about the physical thing, and not about the use and behavior at all. So I think we're shifting from like the noun version of architecture to the verb version. And now everything's all about the verb.
That's a nice point.
Can I add one more thing? Also, I think one thing to also note is the fact that cities that pretty much for the past century, they've been designed with the same parameters by looking at, let's say, vicinity to natural resources such as park, water, or let's say structures that they've been inherited from previous city grids. Perhaps they're not relevant anymore, right? So we're all familiar with the gentrification phenomena and how these parameters are becoming a little bit more volatile. But I think what's exciting about thinking about city of future, and this is something that actually in a book, Decoding the City, Dietmar Offenhaber is touching upon, that is the fact that we're going to be able to create more precise cities, but these are going to be shorter term cities. So we might never plan another New York, but we might be able to create more accurate and more maybe temporal cities that are specific to certain functionality, and then we regroup again. And I just want to touch upon what was mentioned about importance of looking at other information structuring models such as blockchain, as well as other parameters such as, let's say, environmental parameters. These are parameters that have been invisible for a very long time, but now they are becoming really important in the way that also zoning is being questioned. So there was an article in New York Times yesterday about San Francisco's fires and the way that right now they're looking at building codes and how most of them that were built or let's say adapted in 1990s, they're all placed in high risk fire zones. So I think we're going to start to look for new parameters, and we're going to have new, let's say, evaluation criteria for rethinking or for planning city of futures. So I think this is an interesting shift, because we're understanding that maybe what worked for many years, it is not maybe applying anymore.
I just want to go ahead.
I think one interesting aspect there, you were talking about gentrification. We can also try to look at this aspect of the impact of technologies that were presented today, how those are going to impact the way that the prices, let's say, of the property go up and down in a way. Because if you're thinking traditionally speaking, the way that the property gains value is by its proximity to some important, let's say, cultural venues or something. So if you're very close to a theater, for example, for sure your apartment or house price will be higher. If you're close to a public square, it's going to be higher and so on. Yeah. And right now we have virtual squares. We have Zoom. I don't have to go to theater. Maybe I just need a headset and I just thank you, Violet. Sorry.
Thank you, Violet.
So probably in a way, the impact that this technology will have, it's going to probably make the prices more affordable, because there's not going to be any more this kind of need of, like I have a public theater or something. Yeah, that's going to be something very, I think, very selective. It's not going to be that everyone goes there. And suddenly, only because of VR, AR, and all these technologies, yeah, that city is going to be completely different. Yeah, it's going to be a completely different kind of organization, because you're not clustering anymore around this kind of physical, objects, plazas, and so on. Yeah, because mostly our meeting space is going to be digital.
Let me just pick up on that. There was an article 20 years ago. I published this book, Design for a Digital World. It was based on a conference we had called E-Futures, which is kind of interesting because it also had the word future in it. And there was a guy called Andrew Gillespie who wrote an article for that, and he's a geographer at the time of the University of Newcastle. And he made this comment, which, he said that, we had imagined that with the digital, we would somehow, it would lead to the kind of the intensification of our city centres, people moving to the centre where they can enjoy all these things, and it would really lead to a urban growth. And in some ways, maybe it has. But anyway, what happened immediately, he said, was actually the opposite, in the sense that we had these out-of-town logistical centres where Amazon were kind of distributing things, and actually it wasn't that at all. And I'm just wondering what's going to happen out of this combination of what we're going through. Are the city centres of today going to suddenly go through the kind of thing that, frankly, downtown LA went through a few years ago, where it became kind of run down and full of homeless people? Or are we going to have that urban growth continuing that was happening? Let me just throw that out there as a question.
Maybe it's not one or the other. I mean, I'm being at FIU and working in a building that was designed by Shumi. It's kind of impossible to not think about his concept of event spaces and how he was kind of imagining the fact that actually it's not about the place itself. Maybe it's not so much about what you envision let's say a traditional gathering space would do, but it's more about what people do within that. And it's quite fascinating to see, let's say, his vision of Parc de la Villette and actually what Pokemon Go did with that same space, right? A park that was not so successful as a public space due to mismanagement and the way that policies were kind of managed in terms of maintenance. It was completely transformed when you have this digital assets that were distributed, and it became, in a sense, this perfect event space where it had this like an interesting and maybe organic balance of digital and physical, and really rethinking sociospatial dynamics based on our experience of 1.5 years in Zoom, as well as really understanding how this idea of a digital twin or a digital overlay or interest in precision, precise simulation has been also advanced in the past year or so due to advances in spatial computing. Is quite exciting, and cities are truly spaces that we're going to begin to see these things taking place, and directly goes back to previous comment about gamification, as gamification is absolutely key when thinking about cryptocurrencies, is absolutely key when thinking about economic models, but also when we're thinking about what keeps people in places, which is a hint of entertainment, right? So that's pretty much key criteria that we could, in a sense, adapt from gamification and game theory. So it's very it's very difficult to separate these boundaries, and it's a very exciting time to begin to, going back to previous comment about usually progress happen when technologies converge. That's absolutely, I think, the way to approach this.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, because I was, Violet was teaching at Columbia, and you were teaching at Columbia, and I, a long time back, was teaching at Columbia, and in some ways, Bernard Schumi kind of hit his, I mean, because he's actually saying much what Violet was saying. We need to think about buildings in terms of verbs rather than nouns. And he was talking about this notion of cross-programming, which actually, I always thought the perfect example of that was something like Las Vegas, where, I mean, whether or not you like Las Vegas is another question, but I think there was a very smart way of thinking about it, whereby Las Vegas transforms itself from being a kind of a space for, let's say, I don't know, dirty weekend or something. During the week, it becomes a conference, and it could become many different things all at once. And they play around with the kind of the cost of the rooms and things so as to encourage people to use it at certain times. And it becomes a kind of a question of how do you occupy space, from a financial point of view. And it seems to me that's the kind of, in some ways, the key question. And somehow it also, it kind of ties into some of these kind of the issues of the sharing economy that we've got already. Do we need to have a car anymore now that we have Uber and whatever? The other question comes, well, maybe, so people are not owning cars, and then how do we think about space in a different kind of way? Or buildings and things, and the occupancy of buildings? And so there are a lot of the kind of questions out there. And the Tesla car, the idea that maybe you don't bother parking it, becomes a self-driving taxi for other people. I think maybe that's the kind of the way to think about it. So I love that notion that Violet talked about, sea of buildings in terms of verbs instead of nouns, because I think that, to my mind, is the key question of how we should be shifting in the future. Okay, well, I don't know if we've got any final comments coming. There was one question in the chat that was just maybe as well. Yes, from Otto Uyang. If Apple announced their consumer level AR glass in the future, and we are going to live in a metaverse, what kind of skills kind of skills will architects need to have to build up the virtual space? It seems to raise that question, I think, which is an important one, that technology itself has, in some ways, has actually facilitated a kind of interdisciplinary approach whereby we're no longer, as architects, we're no longer constrained by certain things. I know that that when Benaz Farai went onto your the PhD program that you were doing, Biana, that she discovered that we actually have skills as architects that we don't realize how we can maybe deploy those skills elsewhere. And I think that the background that architects have as being able to think in terms of material behaviors, think in terms of three-dimensional space, to think in terms of design, are actually transferable skills. So I would wonder, I suspect that behind that question is that really it's a question of what architects will end up doing. And the other day I showed this fabulous work that was coming out by Damien and Lydia from Lifeforms.io, where they're kind of like gamifying things and understanding how we can not just fetishize AI, but think about this as part of a new kind of creative use of these technologies. And I suspect that the notion of an architect will have to change in many ways. Already it's changing. This is a concept that Helen Castle once put to me. She said, well, basically, I think there's a concept of other architectures. There are plenty of architects who end up working for Disney or working for, I don't know, like the Greg Lynn working on some kind of robot's going to follow you around, or working in the movies and so on. And it's a background education that's actually incredibly useful. And I could imagine there will be spaces of the imagination opening up, or space of employment, shall we say, precisely because of these new technologies. Maybe I could ask.
Yeah, I want to also add up on that. I totally agree with Neil, and I think engineers who are developing these technologies or glasses and devices, they don't suggest any application. They shouldn't suggest how we design and how we practice. We should really suggest how this technology can be applied and what we can do. So we should really answer that instead of asking the industry to answer that for us, like such as like in our some creative practices, we are no longer really using AutoCAD. AutoCAD is designed for architects, but we are using, for example, Maya, Rhino, Unity, Unreal. They are designed for character rigging or the character design, animation industry. They are designed for game industry. They are we are kind of looking for different solutions for our creativity. And I think similarly, there is no answer. It's good that the person who asked, who are really quite curious about this, and really it's some kind of things that we as architects should really suggest to the industry, how the technologies can be helpful for architectural design. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in some ways architects are always these kind of hackers, right? And most of the technology we use were never designed for architects. I mean, CATIA was designed for the aircraft industry, and and Maya, I think, was for product design and things. But so we kind of like, in a way, it's an interesting kind of question in the sense we've always perceived ourselves as people who kind of let's say creatively invent form, but maybe what we actually we're going along with what Violet was saying, we're creatively thinking about new practices or new operations that we could use that imagination to deploy those tools in new ways. So, I mean, I guess that was what you did anyway. So, I mean, with your AR in terms of getting things built in different countries during COVID.
Also, I have one comment about that question. So, as a software developer, I guess there should be some level of engineering things. So probably Apple, once they decide to release their product, like a physical product, they should have a lot of like a API or some add-on or plugin that you can just use it. Just think about like the rendering industry, for example, like 10 years ago, I don't know how many people, how that like VA is one of the most famous rendering engine at that time, but not many people, I mean, if I go to the school to have some creative, I mean, people have no idea about what is VA because they use other rendering engine, which is a way easier than VA. You don't need to worry about like other parameters and combination with the light and your object, for example. So, Apple is a smart guy. They're gonna make their own sort of ecosystem so that you can, I mean, as long as you are, you can design your idea in the 3D programs such as Maya and Rhino and other 3D commercial program out there. I guess there should be, very easy sort of bridge between the hardware and software, I guess. Yeah. Just one comment from my perspective.
I mean, just as a simple comment that one of my colleagues who's working in Silicon Fen in Cambridge came to, he was saying that the phone, actually when they first started developing the phone, they thought it was for businessmen and the rich businessmen would have it, and then the transition happened when the rich businessmen gave the phone to their daughters, and said, "Listen, give me a call when you want me to pick me up, and I'll come and pick you up." And all of a sudden, it's that inventive reuse that often escapes the kind of primary intention of a technology that opens up all these new possibilities. So I think we can wrap up now. This has been a very productive session, and you don't know quite where it's going to lead. And I think there have been some really interesting ideas coming out that have left me thinking about things. But it's been a fantastic contribution. I mean, Violet's no longer here, but I want to thank Violet for her introduction. The term verb I've got me thinking about how we should rethink what it is an architects do. I'd like to also thank NJ and Biana for their contributions, and also Sumin. This is this is the end of our series. It's the end of the 6. It came and went too quickly, but it'll be, of course, all these videos will be uploaded, so they'll be there as a repository for the future. But we move on tomorrow to a new series of lectures. We still have one lecture tomorrow. I mean, it's going to be today in Asia, right? This evening in Asia, which is going to be tomorrow in the States, we're going to have Patrick Schumacher, who's going to be talking as part of the Architecture and Philosophy series, and then this time tomorrow, as it were, so in the morning in China, in Korea, in the evening in the States, we'll have the first of our doctoral presentations, whereby actual doctoral students will be presenting their work. And just to say, this is the intention behind all of this was precisely to exploit how we could start or how we could rethink our operations using this tool. So much of the ideas that we've been talking about is precisely what we're trying to do here, is that is to say, create a platform whereby we can share information. The idea that there should be kind of one professor in one school talking to one group of students doesn't make any sense anymore. Now we can kind of operate together on a platform like this and sharing information. So I'd like to thank you all for your contributions today. It's been a really interesting session, and it's the end, but it's not the end because we're going to carry on. I look forward to the workshops themselves, which will start on the 27th of June. On the 26th, we have our opening ceremony, where we have a number of really interesting contributions coming in. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to tell you just yet, but anyway, it's going to be an amazing opening ceremony for sure. So thank you so much for everything. Let's look forward to catching up on our discussions again sometime. Thank you to the contributors, and thank you to those who've asked questions as well. And thank you above all to those behind the scenes. I mean, I can't underestimate the people like Ahmed and Gustavo and Virginia, and if I mention their names, I'm forgetting other people, but there's a huge team in Shanghai as well that are supporting this, Chao and Cora and so on, to make this happen. And it's a really amazing group effort. It's a team effort. So thank you everybody for contributing, and thank you for the team behind supporting it. It's been fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.